Some families inherit fortunes, others inherit secrets, but only a few discover that the greatest legacy can be placed inside the hands of someone everyone else overlooked. The private medical wing overlooking downtown Chicago was quieter than a church after sunset. Soft golden lights reflected against polished marble floors while expensive paintings lined the walls, reminding every visitor that wealth could purchase comfort, but never another heartbeat. Behind the largest suite, Eleanor Moretti, the 80-year-old matriarch of one of the city's most respected families, rested beneath crisp white blankets as the rhythmic sound of medical monitors filled the silence. Her breathing had grown weaker with every passing hour, and everyone in the room understood that time had become the most valuable thing money could no longer buy. Adrian Moretti stood beside the window in a perfectly tailored black suit, his black dress shirt opened just enough to reveal the familiar black and gray tattoos climbing from his chest to his neck. His dark brown hair, brushed neatly back with streaks of natural silver, matched the neatly trimmed beard framing his strong jaw. He carried himself with calm authority, saying very little, because men who had spent decades making impossible decisions rarely wasted words. Around him gathered relatives dressed in expensive clothing, respected attorneys, longtime family advisors, and physicians who quietly exchanged careful glances. No one spoke above a whisper. Every eye remained fixed on Eleanor, waiting for her final words. For several minutes, she remained completely still. Then, almost imperceptibly, her fingers moved against the blanket. Adrian immediately stepped closer and gently reached for her hand. "Mother," he said softly, lowering his voice in a way almost no one else had ever heard. Eleanor slowly opened her eyes. Though weakened by illness, there was still unmistakable clarity behind them. She looked directly at her son, then beyond him toward the people gathered inside the room. One by one, her gaze drifted across familiar faces before stopping somewhere near the doorway. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged at first. The nurse leaned closer. Everyone instinctively held their breath. Finally, in a voice barely louder than the rustling sheets, Eleanor whispered, "Please, bring Naomi." Confused silence settled over the room. Several relatives exchanged puzzled looks. One woman frowned as though she had misheard. Another quietly asked, "Naomi?" Adrian's expression barely changed, but his eyes revealed genuine surprise. Naomi Carter was not an attorney. She was not a business executive. She was not a blood relative. She was simply the family's Black Maid, the woman who quietly maintained the estate every single day without ever asking for recognition. Why would his mother ask for her now, when every member of the family stood only a few feet away? Before anyone could question it further, Eleanor weakly squeezed Adrian's fingers and repeated with unexpected determination, "Please, Naomi." The room seemed to shrink beneath the weight of those two words. Expensive watches continued ticking. Medical equipment continued humming. Yet no one moved. It was as though the entire Moretti family had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. Adrian slowly turned toward the doorway where a hospital staff member waited. His calm voice broke the silence. "Find Naomi Carter. Bring her here immediately." And in that unforgettable moment, before anyone understood why, the future of the Moretti family quietly began to change. Naomi Carter arrived less than 5 minutes later, still wearing the same neatly pressed black housekeeping uniform she had started her shift in before sunrise. Her name badge rested quietly against her chest, and her dark brown skin carried a natural healthy glow beneath the soft hospital lighting. She moved with calm grace, her posture elegant despite the uncertainty waiting beyond the doorway. Her oval face framed gentle yet confident features, from her expressive almond-shaped dark brown eyes to her softly defined lips and carefully shaped eyebrows. She wore only light natural makeup, enough to highlight her warm smile without drawing attention to herself. The nurses greeted her with quiet respect because they had seen her visit Eleanor almost every day for months, often arriving long before anyone else and leaving long after the family had returned home. As Naomi reached the entrance to the private suite, one of Adrian's cousins stepped forward, blocking her path with a forced smile that barely concealed his irritation. "There must be some mistake," he said politely enough for the medical staff to hear. "Mrs. Moretti needs her family right now." Naomi lowered her eyes respectfully. "Mr. Moretti asked me to come." Before she could take another step, Adrian's older sister Victoria folded her arms and looked Naomi up and down with visible disbelief. "Mother is confused," she said. "She has been under medication all day. She probably does not even realize what she is saying." Another relative quietly added, "This is supposed to be a private family moment." Naomi nodded once. "I understand. If Mrs. Moretti no longer wishes to see me, I will leave immediately." There was no resentment in her voice, no attempt to defend herself, only the calm dignity that had quietly shaped every conversation she had ever had inside the Moretti estate. Adrian remained silent. He watched Naomi carefully, noticing something he had never truly paid attention to before. She did not argue. She did not look offended. She simply waited, respecting everyone around her despite the uncomfortable tension filling the hallway. A physician stepped out of the room at that exact moment and spoke gently. "Mrs. Moretti is asking for Naomi again." The hallway became unusually still. Victoria forced a smile toward the doctor. "She is exhausted. Perhaps she means one of the nurses." The physician slowly shook his head. "No. She specifically asked for Naomi Carter." Another long silence followed. Adrian glanced toward the partially open hospital door where he could hear his mother's weakened breathing. He remembered countless board meetings where billion-dollar decisions had been made in less time than this simple question now required. His mother had always been deliberate with her words. Even during difficult moments, she rarely asked twice for anything. Yet today she had repeated only one name, Naomi. Adrian finally looked directly at his relatives. His voice remained calm, steady, and impossible to challenge. "If my mother has enough strength left to make one request, then no one in this hallway has the right to deny it." No one answered. Victoria stepped aside reluctantly. The others followed, though their expressions revealed more confusion than agreement. Naomi looked at Adrian with quiet gratitude, but said nothing. She gently adjusted the sleeve of her uniform, took a slow breath, and walked through the doorway with measured steps. As the door quietly closed behind her, every member of the Moretti family remained outside, wondering why the woman they had barely noticed for years had suddenly become the final person Eleanor Moretti wanted beside her. Naomi quietly closed the hospital room door behind her, leaving the whispers and doubtful glances in the hallway where they belonged. Inside, everything felt different. The tension that had filled the corridor dissolved into peaceful silence, broken only by the soft rhythm of the heart monitor and the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Eleanor slowly turned her head toward Naomi, and for the first time that evening, a faint smile appeared on her tired face. Naomi stepped closer, lowering herself beside the bed without speaking. She gently reached for the older woman's hand with both of hers, careful not to disturb the medical tubes resting across the blanket. "I am here, Mrs. Moretti," she whispered. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, as though simply hearing that familiar voice had lifted a burden she had been carrying for months. Outside the room, no one understood why this quiet woman mattered so much. Inside, no explanation was necessary. Their friendship had never been built on status. It had been built one ordinary morning at a time. Nearly 6 years earlier, Naomi had accepted a housekeeping position at the Moretti estate after moving to Chicago to build a better life. She arrived every morning before sunrise, prepared breakfast exactly the way Eleanor preferred, arranged fresh flowers in the library every Monday, and made certain the large house always felt warm instead of merely expensive. Most members of the family barely noticed who completed those small routines. Eleanor noticed every single one. When arthritis made it difficult for Eleanor to button her cardigan, Naomi quietly helped without making her feel helpless. When winter storms covered the gardens in snow, Naomi wheeled Eleanor beside the tall windows so she could still enjoy watching cardinals gather around the bird feeders. When doctors advised Eleanor to walk a little farther each afternoon, Naomi matched her pace without ever rushing her. They talked about books, old jazz records, homemade peach pie, neighborhood bakeries, and memories of summers spent near Lake Michigan decades before Adrian had become the head of the family. Never once did Naomi ask about business, money, or inheritance. Eleanor often smiled and said that was exactly why their conversations felt honest. On difficult days, when visitors canceled because meetings had become more important than family, Naomi still appeared carrying fresh tea, a warm blanket, and the same gentle smile. She celebrated Eleanor's birthday even during years when some relatives sent only expensive gifts with handwritten cards prepared by assistants. Eleanor treasured those quiet moments more than anyone realized. She once told Naomi that kindness repeated every day eventually became stronger than grand gestures offered once a year. Naomi never imagined those simple acts would be remembered. She believed she was only doing her job with compassion. Looking into Eleanor's eyes now, she understood that every ordinary conversation, every shared cup of tea, every slow walk through the gardens had quietly become part of something far greater than employment. Eleanor lightly squeezed Naomi's hand with surprising determination. Her voice remained fragile, but her eyes carried unmistakable purpose. Naomi leaned closer so she would not miss a single word, unaware that beyond the closed door an entire family still believed they knew the story, while the truth had only just begun to reveal itself. Naomi leaned so close that she could hear every fragile breath between Eleanor's words. The older woman's fingers trembled inside hers, yet the gentle pressure never disappeared. Eleanor looked into Naomi's eyes with remarkable clarity, though every distraction beyond the hospital room had simply faded away. "You always listened," she whispered slowly, "even when I had nothing important to say." Naomi's eyes filled with emotion, but she held her composure. "Everything you said mattered to me, Mrs. Moretti." Eleanor smiled faintly. "That is why I chose you." For several quiet seconds neither woman spoke. The silence itself seemed sacred, carrying years of shared mornings, quiet conversations, and ordinary moments that had quietly become extraordinary. Eleanor gathered enough strength to continue. "People think families survive because of money," she said with great effort. "They do not. Families survive because someone chooses kindness when no one is watching." Naomi lowered her head, overwhelmed by the weight of those words. Eleanor slowly lifted her hand toward the bedside table. Resting there was a small cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax. Naomi gently picked it up and placed it into Eleanor's waiting hand before the older woman carefully pressed it back into Naomi's palms. "This is not for you," Eleanor whispered. "It is for Adrian." Naomi looked down at the envelope without opening it. "I will make certain he receives it." Eleanor lightly shook her head. "Not tonight." Naomi looked up again, confused but attentive. Eleanor took another slow breath. "Give it to him after everyone has stopped listening to themselves." Naomi remained silent, allowing the older woman to continue at her own pace. "They will argue. They will misunderstand. Some will believe I made a mistake. Promise me you will not defend yourself." Naomi's heart tightened. "If they blame me?" Eleanor nodded gently. "Especially then." Naomi struggled to answer. Every instinct told her to refuse such a burden, yet she could not ignore the trust shining in Eleanor's eyes. "I promise," she finally said. Eleanor relaxed slightly, as though an invisible weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. "There is one more thing," she whispered. "Adrian believes his greatest responsibility is protecting this family. He does not yet understand that protecting a family and preserving its heart are not always the same." Naomi listened without interrupting. "He trusts strength because strength has never failed him. One day, he must learn to trust compassion as well. When that day comes, everything will change." Naomi carefully placed one hand over Eleanor's. "He loves you very much." Eleanor smiled through tired eyes. "I know. That is why he still has hope." Outside the room, impatient footsteps echoed faintly through the hallway as relatives continued wondering what conversation could possibly require so much time. Inside, however, neither woman noticed the passing minutes. Eleanor gently squeezed Naomi's hand one final time. "Do not let this house become colder than these hospital walls," she whispered. "Remind Adrian that every person who walks through his front door deserves to leave with their dignity still intact." Naomi closed her eyes briefly before answering with quiet conviction. "I will honor your wish." Eleanor's peaceful smile returned, brighter than it had been all evening, as though the promise itself had become the final comfort she had been waiting to hear. Naomi remained beside Eleanor's bed long after the last promise had been spoken. Neither woman felt the need to fill the room with more words. Some conversations reached a place where silence carried greater meaning than language ever could. Eleanor continued holding Naomi's hand with surprising gentleness, her breathing becoming slower and more peaceful than it had been all day. The anxious tension that had surrounded her only an hour earlier seemed to disappear, replaced by a quiet expression of contentment. Naomi softly brushed a loose strand of silver hair away from Eleanor's forehead, exactly as she had done countless mornings at the Moretti estate. "You should rest now," she whispered. Eleanor looked at her one last time, her tired eyes filled with gratitude rather than sadness. A faint smile rested on her face as though she had finally completed the only task that still mattered to her. Slowly, her fingers relaxed inside Naomi's hands. The heart monitor continued its gentle rhythm before gradually settling into a calm stillness that filled the room with profound peace. Naomi lowered her head, respectfully, closed her eyes, and silently thanked the remarkable woman who had changed her life simply by treating her with kindness. She remained seated for another moment, refusing to rush the sacred quiet that had settled over the room. Then she gently placed Eleanor's hands together upon the blanket exactly the way Eleanor herself had once said looked graceful and dignified. Naomi carefully straightened the blanket near her shoulders before pressing the call button for the medical staff. Within seconds, nurses entered quietly, immediately understanding what had happened. Their voices remained soft, their movements measured and respectful. One nurse looked at Naomi with gentle compassion. "Were you with her?" Naomi nodded once. She was not alone. Outside the room, Adrian noticed the door opening and immediately stood. One glance at Naomi's face told him everything no words could explain. He walked into the room without hesitation while the rest of the family followed several steps behind. Adrian stopped beside the bed, looking at his mother with an expression that remained composed but noticeably heavier than before. He reached down and gently kissed her forehead. No tears fell. He simply closed his eyes for several seconds, honoring the woman who had shaped his life. Then his attention shifted toward Naomi. She still stood quietly near the bedside, holding the sealed cream-colored envelope against her side exactly as Eleanor had instructed. Adrian noticed that she had not attempted to leave, nor had she drawn attention to herself. She simply stood there with quiet respect. "Thank you for being here," Adrian said sincerely. Naomi lowered her head. It was an honor. Before Adrian could ask anything else, Victoria stepped forward, her voice careful but unmistakably curious. "What did Mother tell you?" Every face in the room turned toward Naomi. Attorneys, relatives, physicians, and longtime family advisors all waited for her answer. Naomi remembered every word of her promise. She looked at Eleanor one final time before calmly replying. "She asked me to keep a promise. That is all I can say today." Several relatives exchanged frustrated glances, clearly dissatisfied by her answer. Adrian studied Naomi's expression carefully. For the first time in years, he realized he could not read the woman who had quietly worked inside his home almost every day. She was not hiding pride, fear, or ambition. She was protecting something. As the first rays of morning sunlight slowly reached the hospital windows, Adrian looked from his mother's peaceful face to the unopened envelope resting in Naomi's hands, unaware that the greatest lesson his mother had ever prepared for him had only just begun. 3 days later, the Moretti estate stood beneath a gray autumn sky as black cars quietly arrived one after another. The funeral had ended with dignity, yet the silence inside the mansion felt heavier than the ceremony itself. Family members gathered in the grand library where Eleanor had spent countless afternoons reading beside the fireplace. Fresh white lilies rested on a polished table beneath her portrait, filling the room with a gentle fragrance that somehow made her absence feel even more real. Adrian stood near the fireplace wearing the same calm expression he had carried through every public appearance since his mother's passing. His tailored black suit remained immaculate, his posture unwavering, but those who knew him well could see that exhaustion had settled behind his steady brown eyes. Naomi quietly entered the room only after every relative had already taken a seat. She wore her simple black housekeeping uniform, her appearance as modest as ever, carrying nothing except the sealed cream-colored envelope Eleanor had entrusted to her. Several relatives immediately noticed it. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Is that what Mother gave you?" Naomi answered honestly. "Yes." "Then why have you kept it?" another cousin demanded. "Because I was asked to wait." Before anyone could continue questioning her, the family's longtime attorney, Harold Bennett, cleared his throat. Mrs. Moretti left written instructions regarding the timing of that envelope. Every conversation stopped. Harold opened a leather folder and adjusted his glasses. Her exact words were, "Naomi will know when the room is ready. No one is to pressure her before." Then, a wave of disbelief spread across the room. Several relatives shifted impatiently. One quietly muttered that it made no sense for a housekeeper to decide anything involving the family. Naomi lowered her eyes and remained silent. She had no desire to defend herself. She remembered every word of her promise. Adrian watched her carefully. During the past 3 days, he had replayed his mother's final hours over and over, searching for an explanation that never came. The more he reflected, the more one memory refused to leave him. He had never once seen Naomi ask his mother for recognition, favors, or influence. She had simply shown up every day with consistency that no one else had questioned because no one else had truly noticed it. Adrian slowly walked toward Naomi until they stood only a few feet apart. His voice remained calm. "Did my mother ask you to protect something?" Naomi met his eyes respectfully. "Yes." "Was it money?" "No." "Property?" "No." Adrian studied her face for several long seconds. He saw no fear, no calculation, no hidden ambition. Only quiet conviction. Finally, he asked the question that mattered most. "Was it me?" Naomi hesitated for the first time. Then she answered softly. "She believed you would understand when the time was right." The room fell completely silent. Adrian nodded almost imperceptibly. Without another question, he stepped back and addressed everyone gathered around him. "No one will pressure Naomi again." Several relatives immediately objected, but Adrian calmly raised one hand. "My mother trusted her final wish to Naomi. If I cannot honor my own mother's judgment for a few more moments, then I do not deserve to learn what she wanted me to understand." Naomi gently held the unopened envelope against her heart. She knew that inside rested words capable of changing every relationship in that room. Yet she also knew Eleanor had not entrusted her with a secret to create division. She had entrusted her with patience, believing that only a heart prepared to listen could truly hear the truth. That evening, after the last guests had quietly departed, Adrian remained alone in his mother's library. The fireplace cast a warm glow across shelves filled with books Eleanor had collected over a lifetime. And for the first time in years, he noticed how many pages carried handwritten notes tucked between them. He slowly walked from shelf to shelf, touching familiar spines that had always been part of the house, but had never truly been part of his life. On a small table beside Eleanor's favorite chair rested a reading journal. It had been left exactly where she always kept it. Adrian opened it carefully, expecting quotations from novels or reminders for appointments. Instead, he found page after page describing ordinary moments that no one else had ever considered important. Naomi brought fresh flowers because she remembered today was the anniversary of my father's birthday. Another entry read, "She stayed after her shift ended because the rain made my arthritis worse, even though I told her she could go home." Another simply said, "She makes this large house feel lived in." Adrian turned another page, then another. Not once did his mother write about expensive gifts, lavish dinners, or impressive business victories. She wrote about patience, laughter, kindness, and quiet conversations over tea. Every few pages Naomi's name appeared again, never as an employee, always as someone whose presence brought peace. Adrian closed the journal and stared into the fire, realizing how much of his mother's final years had unfolded beyond his attention. The next morning, he found Naomi arranging fresh white flowers in the front hallway exactly as she had every Monday for years. Nothing about her routine had changed. She greeted him with the same respectful smile she had always offered. "Good morning, Mr. Moretti." Adrian paused before answering. "Did my mother ask you to keep doing this?" Naomi looked at the flowers for a moment. No, she never had to ask. Adrian glanced around the enormous entrance hall. "You came back to work only days after losing someone you cared about." Naomi nodded gently. Mrs. Moretti always believed that caring for a home was one way of caring for the people inside it. Before Adrian could respond, Victoria entered the hallway carrying several framed photographs she had removed from Eleanor's bedroom. As she sorted through them, one picture slipped onto the marble floor. Naomi immediately bent down to pick it up with great care. It showed Eleanor sitting on a garden bench, smiling warmly beside Naomi as they held baskets filled with freshly cut roses. Victoria stared at the photograph with visible surprise. "I have never seen this before," Naomi quietly answered. "Mrs. Moretti asked one of the gardeners to take it after we planted new roses together." Victoria looked at the date printed on the back. It had been taken 3 years earlier. On the same afternoon, she had canceled lunch with her mother because of a charity event. Another relative entered carrying additional family albums. As they opened them, similar photographs appeared again and again. Eleanor and Naomi reading together, decorating the Christmas tree, watching the first snowfall from the conservatory, baking peach pie in the estate kitchen. None of the pictures were formal. None had been staged. They captured simple moments of genuine companionship that no one else had shared. One by one, conversations faded. The relatives slowly realized that while they had believed they were giving Eleanor everything she needed, someone else had quietly been giving her the one thing they had overlooked most often: faithful presence. And as the room settled into thoughtful silence, even those who had questioned Naomi the loudest found themselves unable to meet her eyes. 2 mornings later, the house awakened to familiar routines, but something inside its walls had quietly changed. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the entrance hall, illuminating polished marble floors and the fresh white lilies Naomi had arranged before anyone else had come downstairs. She moved through the estate with the same quiet confidence she always had, never expecting recognition, never changing her gentle rhythm. As far as she was concerned, promises were not fulfilled through speeches. They were honored through everyday actions. Adrian watched from the second-floor balcony without announcing his presence. For years he had believed leadership was measured by authority, discipline, and decisive action. Now he found himself wondering whether his mother had spent her final lesson teaching him something entirely different. He remembered the sealed envelope still resting safely inside his study. He had not opened it because Naomi had kept her promise exactly as Eleanor had requested, and somehow he knew that rushing the moment would only dishonor his mother's wisdom. Later that afternoon, Adrian invited every family member, every household employee, and every longtime advisor into the estate's great hall. The request surprised everyone. It was unusual for housekeepers, gardeners, drivers, and kitchen staff to stand beside attorneys and relatives in the same gathering. Whispered conversations spread through the room as people tried to understand what was happening. Naomi quietly took her place near the back, hoping not to become the center of attention once again. Adrian entered wearing his familiar black suit, his calm expression carrying the same quiet authority everyone recognized. He stood before the fireplace where generations of Moretti family portraits watched over the room. For several moments he simply looked around, allowing the silence to settle. Then he spoke. "My mother spent her life building this family. I believed I understood how she did it. I was wrong." Every eye remained fixed on him. Adrian continued. "During the past week, I have discovered that respect cannot exist only for those whose names appear on legal documents or family trees. It must also belong to those whose kindness holds a home together every single day." Several employees exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether they had heard correctly. Adrian slowly turned toward Naomi. "Mrs. Carter." Naomi looked up, surprised to hear him address her so formally. "Please come forward." She hesitated before walking across the room with measured, graceful steps. When she reached him, Adrian faced everyone again. "My mother did not ask us to reward Naomi. She asked us to learn from her." The room became completely still. Adrian's voice remained calm, but deeply sincere. "Beginning today, every person who works inside this home will be treated with the same dignity we expect for ourselves. Their ideas will be heard. Their contributions will be acknowledged. Respect will no longer depend on title or position." No applause followed. The moment was too genuine for celebration. Instead, people quietly reflected on how simple those words sounded and how rarely they had been practiced. Adrian then looked directly at Naomi. "My mother trusted you because you protected her peace without asking for recognition. I cannot replace what she lost, but I can honor what she valued." Naomi lowered her eyes, visibly moved. "Thank you, Mr. Moretti." Adrian gently shook his head. "My mother believed you were already part of this house long before I understood it." For the first time since Eleanor's passing, warmth returned to the room, not because grief had disappeared, but because every person present could finally feel the beginning of the future she had quietly hoped they would choose. 6 months passed, and the Moretti estate no longer felt like a mansion defined only by wealth. It had become a home shaped by quiet respect. The routines remained familiar, yet the atmosphere had transformed in ways no architect could ever design. Every morning, employees and family members greeted one another by name. Conversations once limited to instructions now included sincere appreciation. The smallest acts of kindness had become part of the culture Eleanor had hoped would survive her. Naomi still arrived before sunrise every weekday, carrying fresh flowers from the estate gardens into the entrance hall exactly as she always had. She still wore her simple black housekeeping uniform, her appearance unchanged, her graceful smile as warm and humble as ever. Nothing about her position had become more glamorous. She had received no title, no office, and no public recognition beyond the respect she had never sought. Yet everyone who entered the house noticed something different. Gardeners paused to wish her a good morning. The kitchen staff saved her favorite cup for coffee. Visiting business partners politely introduced themselves before meetings. Even relatives who had once questioned her presence now thanked her for preserving the warmth Eleanor had loved so deeply. Adrian quietly observed these moments whenever he returned home from work. He had discovered that leadership looked remarkably different than he once imagined. Instead of measuring success only through contracts, investments, or expanding influence, he now measured it by something far less visible. He watched whether people felt safe enough to smile, whether gratitude was expressed without being prompted, and whether every person leaving the estate carried their dignity with them. One Saturday afternoon, Adrian finally opened the cream-colored envelope that had remained untouched inside his study. Naomi stood nearby only because he had asked her to be present. Inside rested a single handwritten letter in Eleanor's elegant script. There were no financial instructions, no legal revisions, and no hidden inheritance. Only one final message. Adrian read each line slowly. His mother's words thanked him for becoming a strong man, but reminded him that true strength was proven by how gently power was carried. She wrote that a family could survive mistakes, disagreements, and hardship, but it could never survive the loss of compassion. Near the end of the letter she wrote, "If you are reading this, then Naomi has already kept her promise. Now it is your turn to keep yours. Make certain that every person who enters this house leaves believing they matter." Adrian carefully folded the letter and looked toward Naomi. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Words were no longer necessary. Everything Eleanor had hoped to teach had already taken root long before the envelope was opened. Adrian smiled with quiet gratitude and simply said, "Thank you for helping my mother leave this world with peace." Naomi answered with the same humility that had guided every step of her journey. "She gave me far more than I ever gave her." Outside, the afternoon sun illuminated the rose garden they had planted together years before. New blossoms covered the paths where Eleanor had once walked slowly with Naomi by her side. Life had continued, but love had left its unmistakable mark upon every corner of the estate. The greatest inheritance Eleanor Moretti left behind had never been measured in dollars or property. It lived inside changed hearts, restored respect, and ordinary acts of kindness repeated day after day. And on that quiet afternoon, everyone who truly understood her legacy remembered what dignity looked like.